Muy buenos días para todos.
Good morning, everyone. It is a true pleasure to be your moderator for this panel on finishing schools for exporting services. We will present the cases of Chile and Uruguay during O2LAC's virtual week of sessions. We'll start with the case of Uruguay, and we would like to introduce our panelists who have provided support for training in services for export, which was an IDB initiative started with Uruguay in 2012 to position the global service sector, increasing investments, exports, and employment in the country. And so we worked on three main areas. First, international positioning. Uruguay's location as a destination for international companies in this area. Two, creating capacity in order to increase participation of the sector, its share in the economy. And three, to improve the regulatory framework in order to foster this sector in Uruguay. During the life of this program between 2013 and 2019, over 35 international companies decided to set down roots in Uruguay and expand their operations. Some of them are with us here today. That meant that there were 1,900 jobs added and about $400 million added in exports. Over 6,000 people were trained, and institutional capacity was strengthened in the public sector, and we'll focus on that today as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our top tier panelists who were a fundamental part of this program. The Executive Director of Uruguay 21, which is the agency that promotes investment and exports in Uruguay, Jaime Miller. Pablo Darch, who is the Director of the National Institute for Employment and Professional Training. INEFPOP, Adriana Martinez, the coordinator for talent for Uruguay 21, Ana Pelufo, HR manager for BUS, and we have the developer of talent for Global Uruguay as well. So I'd like to give the floor to Jaime Ville, first of all, who will talk to you about how Uruguay decided to invest in developing this sector. Go ahead, Jaime. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Federica, for your introduction. It's incredible, but it was 9 years ago that we were involved in the first O2LAC in Montevideo. So as you said, it's been a fruitful path for our country. Uruguay currently has 21% of Uruguay's exports are global services. So it's an area for exports that is about the same as traditional exports in goods from Uruguay. So this started in 2011 or 2012 with the program that you mentioned, Global Services. This was an industry that we did not have about 15 years ago, and it has doubled the growth of exports for Uruguay. So I would like to commend the IDB for this initiative. I was a part of it as a customer at the time because I was an agent that attracted investment in Latin America. So that is the first thing. We need to highlight the importance of this industry for us, and specifically for Uruguay 21. This is one of the areas that we are going to prioritize because this is where there are great possibilities for growth. The program became global, as you mentioned. This was fundamental, especially because we needed to create awareness in public policy makers about the importance of this area, how much we could grow, and this was achieved. And so in that regard, Viviana will explain this a little farther ahead, how this transferred over into numbers and activities. And quite definitely, we liked it so much that we included it in Uruguay 21. So we are very happy with this. And just to give you some information about what Uruguay has to offer this sector, before I turn it over to the panelists, I'd just like to mention a few things that make Uruguay different as far as what it has to offer. Basically, first of all, every country says it has skilled talent, and that is true because there are things that make every country different when it comes to its talent. I think what makes Uruguay different is that we have a high population of bilingual people who speak good English and good Portuguese, and that's not easy to find in other countries. So my first observation is that skilled talent, we can add bilingualism to Uruguay, and it is quite strong. I hope the next panelists can confirm what I'm saying. So that is an extremely important issue because that is what allows us to export these services. I would also say that tax incentives put in place by Uruguay, if you're looking at it as a company who wants to export services, they are unique because it's fully compliant, first of all, with guidelines that have been established. And secondly, there's something for everyone, incentives such as for software, as well as tools in our tax-free zone. So this allows for good competition in the area of taxes. So something that has characterized Uruguay for over 50 years is financial freedom. The fact that people can own their currency. You export services, you invoice in dollars, those dollars are yours, they are in your checking account in dollars, you can pay in dollars, you can invoice in dollars, and I think that all of these things are natural. It's not common in Latin America, and I think that that puts us in a unique position as well when it comes to channeling investments through Uruguay when it comes to exports. And it is true that Uruguay has higher costs than other countries, but you also need to look at revenues and what the advantage is when it comes to Uruguayan exports. The tax advantages and financial incentives and our human resources have proven to have the capacity necessary to serve several countries. So I'm very pleased to be a part of this panel. Thank you for this invitation, and I commend you once again for this program, which has been a huge success for Uruguay. Thank you very much, Jaime. So along those lines, as far as what you were saying, I'd like to give the floor to Viviana so she can tell us a little more about why Uruguay 21 went all in on talent in the sector, and what were the tools for strengthening capacities offered, what were the main outcomes, and a few lessons learned. Go ahead, Viviana, please.
Muchas gracias, Federica. Buenos
Thank you very
días.
much,
Un gusto
Federica.
estar con todos
Good
los
morning. It's a
panelistas,
pleasure to be here
y un
with
gusto
all
estar
of
en
my fellow
O2LAC.
panelists,
Como
and a
bien
pleasure to
decía
be here
Jaime, es un
at
evento que
Outsourced
llegó
LAC. As
para
Jaime said,
quedarse, ¿verdad? Y para
this is
hablar
an
de los
event that's
temas de
here to
actualidad
stay,
para
where
todo
we
el
can
sector
talk about
empresarial y
current
para los
issues that
países.
affect
A
the business
nosotros,
sector in many
algo
countries.
quizás un poquito de
I
historia y
think
después sí
that
vamos a
I'd
los
like to start with a
resultados y
little history and
fundamentalmente
then
lo que
go on to
aprendimos en este
outcomes and
camino, ¿no? Que
what
puede
we
ser
learned along the
interesante para
way,
quienes
which I
estén
think might be
escuchando.
interesting to those of
Para
us
nosotros,
who are
cuando
listening.
nace este
When this
programa, por allá por el
program started
2012,
in about
una
2012,
de las cosas interesantes
one
del planteo
interesting
del
thing when
programa
it
por
came
parte
to the
del BID, que era
proposal for the program
cofinanciador
proposed by
con el
the
gobierno
IDB
uruguayo, era, bueno,
co-financer
se
with the Uruguayan
necesita darle una
government
mirada
was
bien
that you
específica y
need to look
concreta a la
very
industria de los servicios
specifically and
globales.
concretely
Es
at
una industria que viene
the
creciendo en el
global
mundo,
service
que tiene
industry. It's
muchos
been
atributos
growing
positivos para
worldwide,
un país
and
y
it's
que
very
en Uruguay no
attractive
lo
to
estábamos
a
mirando
country.
de
And in
forma
Uruguay, we
integral.
weren't
Entonces ahí
looking at it
vino
in a
como los primeros
holistic
desafíos
fashion. So
en el
those
por
were
qué
our
apoyar
first
esta
challenges.
industria,
Why support
qué
this
valor
industry?
le agrega a
What
un país
value
tener
does this
una fuerte
add to a
industria de
country if
servicios
it has a
globales
strong global
y tener
service sector,
instrumentos que
and if
acompañen
it
ese
has the
crecimiento.
tools
La
necessary
principal
to
reflexión que
bolster
surgió
that
en aquel
growth? The
momento
main question
tenía
that came up
que
at that
ver con la
point
necesidad
had
no
to
solo
do
de
with the need
contar con
to
estadísticas nacionales, con
have
un
national
conocimiento, con una oferta
statistics,
bien
good
clara para el
knowledge, and a
sector,
very clear
sino de
supply for
desarrollar
that sector,
políticas e
but also we needed to
instrumentos que
develop
tuvieran la
policies and
integralidad, la
tools
flexibilidad y la
that were
agilidad
comprehensive,
necesaria que este sector de
flexible,
actividad
and
requiere. Y
speedy
por ahí pasó
enough
como
to
el
do what was
desafío más
necessary. And that
global que
was the
teníamos,
more
¿verdad?
global
Es
challenge
decir,
that we
bueno, no se
faced
trata
then, to
solo de tener
say,
una
well, it's not
política
just a matter of
sectorial de
having a
atracción
policy in the
de
sector
servicios
to
hacia
attract
Uruguay, sino que una vez que
services
llegan
for
al país,
Uruguay, but
tener
once they
una
come to
agenda
the
bien
country,
clara
then
de
we need to
políticas e
have a very
instrumentos
clear agenda, a
que
list
luego
of
de hecha la
tools and
atracción, que
policies.
ahí
So
está la
once we've
vocación de
attracted
Uruguay
investment,
21,
and
también
that's
esté
what
la
Uruguay
vocación de
21
mejorar la
does, we also
competitividad de
need to be
todas
able
las
to
empresas que
improve the
tenemos en el país para
competitiveness of all our
internacionalizarse en
companies
este
in the country
sector,
so that they can
pero
go international in this
fundamentalmente
area. But
aumentar lo que es la
fundamentally speaking, we
empleabilidad de
need
las
to
personas para trabajar en este sector
increase
y la
the number
competitividad
of
de las empresas para
people who
exportar
work
más y
in this
mejor desde
sector
nuestro
so
país.
that companies can
Entonces,
export
el
more,
primer
and the best
desafío
we
fue
have to offer
ubicar a
in the
Uruguay
country.
en el
So
mapa como un
we had to
actor
find
relevante y
Uruguay on the map
atractivo
as a
para desarrollar
relevant
servicios desde
participant and an
Uruguay para el
attractive
mundo.
participant
El
to offer
segundo
services
fue
from
cómo
Uruguay to the
esto
world. That
lo
was our first challenge.
traducimos
And the
hacia el
second was,
talento,
how
hacia
did
las
we translate this
personas.
into
Es
talent
decir, cómo hacemos
when it came to
para que
people?
este
So
sector, que
what
quizás
did
no
we
era tan
do so that
visible, que
this
no era tan
sector, which was
claro,
not as
este
visible,
nexo
not so
entre
clear,
el sector
was a link between the export sector for global services, and how did we link it to all the talent we had in our country, and that very clearly needed to know about this sector. And when I'm talking about talent, I'm not only talking about the people who want to work in this industry, I'm talking about all of our parameters, our educational sector, the ecosystem we had to prepare in order to develop this sector. And that is how the tools that were developed were developed with that in mind, with that comprehensive approach, an approach that allowed us to attract investment, but to create policies and tools. So going international and scaling this up, these were the main points of focus. And I have to talk about the cross-sector approach in order to develop this. We faced challenges when it came to the countries arriving at a better position, but we had to ask, what do we need to do so that the educational sector has a more dynamic link with the global services sector, with the international system, with the whole ecosystem and fabric? How do we create a virtuous cycle between what we need to develop as a country, what people need in order to develop professionally in this area? What do we do to bring together the demands of the private sector and a state policy that included not just Uruguay 21, but also several agencies that needed to develop tools necessary to deal with these needs. So at Uruguay 21, then, we attract investment. Well, that's the core of what we do, but we include talent as a part of our strategy. And including talent as a part of your strategy meant that one thing we started to see was that it wasn't enough to just go along with the business when a company came to the country, not just accompany it, but we had to facilitate access to talent. Then we developed one of our first tools called Smart Talent. At that point in time, it was like a talent registry. That's what people called it, but what we like to say that it's the intersection between talent, companies, the educational ecosystem, and that's really where we make that virtuous dialogue possible. It's a portal that tries to look ahead and say it's not enough to offer jobs, that companies are a part of this portal, but we also need to bring the supply of jobs. We need to link it to the talent that is available, and we need to bring in companies. We have to help them strengthen as employers. We have to link that to the educational sector, and that is our approach when it comes to Smart Talent. At Smart Talent now, we have 36,000 professional profiles, and most of them are in the technology sector and the business sector as far as their profiles go. And it's a living portal. Every day it's growing, and people and businesses are added to it, as are institutions that want to work on developing talent in Uruguay. Uruguay is a small country, but our goal is quality, and so that is what we work on with talent, and that is the value of Smart Talent as a portal now. But we knew also, of course, if we're being aware that there are gaps, and we're not the only ones who have gaps. Latin America does in general, and the demand in the sector is very quick. It's very fluid. It requires immediate training in the short term, and there's some things we need. Sometimes we need to work with the educational sector, apply some pressure so that things happen to provide opportunities to everyone. But sometimes we have to help businesses with their short-term challenges. A company comes, sets up shop, and I won't talk about that because we have other people who can explain this much better than I can. But the spirit was, with our finishing schools, was to have a tool so that the companies' demand for training when they come to the country or when they're thinking about broadening operations, the idea would be demand for training, and we had a subsidy then that understood perfectly the needs of the companies. We could act quickly and work with the companies during that process of professional development. What did we create there? More competitiveness. We allowed companies more possibilities to broaden their operations, but also the better chance that people would actually get jobs. So that was a perfect equation. And we're a small country, we're open to talent. So another thing we needed was having tools that would facilitate, would make things easier for companies when they came to our country. We know that when a company is going to come to the country, it needs to bring in people. It also needs to bring in talent from abroad. Uruguay has open doors, and the president has said this tirelessly the last few days. He spoken at
somos
many
un país
fora
abierto por
and to the
naturaleza,
international media. We're
entonces
an
ya
open
no
country
solo
by
el
nature.
instrumento de finishing, de capacitar a
So
nuestras
it's not
personas
just
cuando
training or
tenemos algunos
finishing
gaps, de
schools
ayudar
when
al
training
acceso al
people in their
talento a través de
gaps
Smart
or
Talent, sino
helping
que también
access to talent
trabajamos de
through
forma
smart talent.
conjunta con el
We
Ministerio de
work
Relaciones
jointly
Exteriores
with
en un
the
fast track de
foreign
residencias,
ministry on
en donde
a
se hicieron más
fast
de 1000
track for
residencias.
residencies, and there
Entonces,
were
este
over
combo de
1,000
instrumentos que nos permiten el abordaje
applications.
integral
So
del
this
talento,
tool
una
that
página como
allows
el Live
us,
in Uruguay que nos permite
we have a page called
significar toda la
Live in
información de
Uruguay, for
llegada al
example.
país,
This
son
simplifies all
instrumentos que
information when a company
desarrollamos
comes to the country.
pensando
These
en
are
el
tools we
sector,
developed
en el
thinking about
desarrollo
this
del sector,
sector,
en
thinking
mejorar
about
las
developing
potencialidades
this
de Uruguay
area,
para la atracción de inversiones
improving
y
Uruguay's position as
fundamentalmente
far
para
as
mejorar la
attracting investment,
competitividad
and to
de las empresas que están
improve
en Uruguay
competitiveness for
y
companies
mejorar
in
las condiciones de
Uruguay, and to
empleabilidad de las
improve
personas. Si lo tenemos que llevar
employability
a
for
números,
people. If
claramente
we had to
Smart
get
Talent es
down
un
to
portal
numbers,
que va
Smart
creciendo
Talent is a
día a día.
portal
Yo
that
decía
is
que tenemos
growing
más de
every day. I
36.000
said we had over
personas
36,000
registradas, más de 3.000
people
oportunidades
registered,
publicadas,
3,000 job
350 empresas
opportunities
del
up,
sector que están
350 companies
activamente
in the sector that
en
are
este momento
actively
publicando.
right now
Y en el caso de Finishing tenemos
publishing.
más de 300
And when it comes
empresas
to finishing
financiadas,
schools,
más
we
de
have
9.000
over
personas
300 companies
capacitadas,
financed, over 9,000 people who are trained,
4.4 millones de inversión,
$4.5
en donde es
million
una
in
inversión en
investment.
donde el
So this is
Finishing Schools
investment.
con
We're
financiamiento de
finishing
INEFOP. Ahora
schools
había solo un
with
minuto porque por suerte está
financing from
Pablo Dash, el
INEFOP, and I
director de
won't talk
INEFOP, que va
about
a
this
hablar de este
because
tema,
we have Pablo
pero
Dash, the director of the
básicamente
system.
lo que hacemos ahí
Basically,
es
what we
inversión
do
pública y
there is
inversión
public
privada. Los
and
privados
private
ponen parte
investment.
de los
The
fondos para el
private
desarrollo de
sector
las
contributes a
personas.
part
Y en
of
Fast
the
Track hemos
funds to
logrado
contribute to
facilitar el
development.
acceso
With Fast
a que
Track,
las
we've
personas puedan
facilitated
llegar a nuestro
access so
país de
that
forma
people can come
rápida
to our
y
country
eficiente a más de
quickly,
1000 personas de
efficiently, and
distintas
we've done
empresas
this
que
for
hoy
over
están
1,000
trabajando
people
acá
from
en
different
Uruguay.
companies who
Uruguay
are
se
currently
jacta de ser
working in
un país
Uruguay. Uruguay is
multicultural
proud
y
of
los
being a
instrumentos tienen que
multicultural
acompañar eso,
country, and so
¿verdad?
we need the
Y
tools
un poco las
necessary in order
lecciones
for that to
aprendidas. A
happen.
ver, nosotros tuvimos
What about
desafíos
lessons
varios.
learned?
O sea,
We faced
sabíamos
several
que el
challenges.
programa
We knew
tenía
that the
financiamiento del BID, pero que
program was
también teníamos que
financed
apostar a
by
la
the IDB, but
sostenibilidad.
we
Algo
also
decía
needed to
recién
make
el
it
director
sustainable.
ejecutivo Jaime
The
cuando
executive
justamente
director
planteaba
was
el
saying,
tema de hoy.
Jaime, when he was
Este
talking about
programa
today's issue,
vive
this
y es
program
realidad dentro de Uruguay 21.
lives
Eso
and
hace
it's a
la
reality in
sostenibilidad de
Uruguay
las
21. This
políticas.
makes it
Ya no se
sustainable.
necesita,
We no
digamos, el
longer need, for
cofinanciamiento
example,
del BID para estar
co-financing
dentro
from the
del
IDB.
tejido de las políticas que hoy
It's a
tiene
part of
activas
the
Uruguay
fabric
21.
of
Pero
our
también sabíamos que necesitábamos
active
trabajar con el
policies,
Ministerio de
but we know
Relaciones
that we
Exteriores
need
para
to work
mejorar
with
todo lo que
the
es la
foreign
atracción de
ministry to
talento, y
improve
por eso el
attracting
Fast Track se hizo en
talent, and
acuerdo con
that's
ellos y
why
en
the
acuerdo
fast
con el
track was
Ministerio
done
del
in
Interior.
coordination
Y
with that
quizás lo más
ministry and the Ministry of the
significativo e
Interior. So
importante también
perhaps
era
one
encontrar un
important
canal para
issue
darle
was
sostenibilidad a
finding a
instrumentos de
way
finishing
to
schools.
make
Y
the
ahí
finishing
empezamos a
schools
conversar con el Instituto
sustainable. And
Nacional de
so we
Formación
started to
Profesional,
talk
que
to the
tiene
Institute for
justamente
Professional
el rol
Development,
principal en esto de la
which
formación
plays
profesional,
the main
y nos
function in
encontramos con algo
professional
bien interesante.
development.
Primero
And
fue una
our work with
institución de
them was
puertas
interesting.
abiertas que
First of
quería
all,
trabajar
our
este
open
tema, que
doors
quería
policies,
entender
we
cómo
wanted to
ser
work on
ágil,
this and
eficiente,
understand
rápido, y
how to be
entender y ser
fast,
permeable a las
efficient, smooth,
necesidades del
and
sector
understand to be
empresarial.
flexible
Y
when it
bueno, y
came
nos
to the needs of
pautamos
the
hacer un
business
piloto
sector.
que empezó
So
en
we decided to conduct
2016 y
a
que hoy
pilot
ya se
project, which
volvió más que
started
un
in
piloto, una
2016, and
realidad,
now
algo que es
it's a reality. It's
escalable
no longer a
dentro
pilot
del
project,
staff de
it's quite
instrumentos que
stable.
tenemos para atender los
Within the
servicios
array of
globales,
tools,
y es un
we
acuerdo que
have
nos
to
ha
attract
permitido esto de la
global investment, and this has
interinstitucionalidad, llevarlo a la
allowed us
práctica, ¿verdad? No solo
to
quedarnos en
work
esta articulación. Entonces,
among
en términos de
agencies.
aprendizaje es
So
esto,
when it
el abordaje
comes to
sectorial con planes
learning, working with
estratégicos,
different
el abordaje
strategies,
del
different
talento como
sectors with
factor clave para
strategic
la
plans,
atracción, el
talent
posicionamiento y la
as a way to
sensibilización
attract
hacia diversidad
investment,
de
and our
actores, y las
positioning and
alianzas
diversity of
institucionales para hacer
actors and
posible la sostenibilidad de los
interagency
instrumentos. Perdón que hablo
partnerships
muy
are all very
rápido, pero
important. I'm sorry
quería
I speak
trasladar
very
las
quickly,
principales
but I wanted
ideas.
to get my
Gracias por
main
el
ideas
espacio.
across. Thank you very much. Thank you, Viviana. That was wonderful. Now we will give the floor to the private sector to understand what companies have benefited. So we'll ask Anna if she can tell us a little bit about how BASF, a company that makes chemicals that is world-class, decided to come to Uruguay to offer its services to its operations in the Americas, and how these different tools that Viviana mentioned helped you scale up your operations in the country to date. So thank you. Go ahead, Viviana. Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be a part of this event and of this panel. Now, I want to make the best use of my time, so I'm going to be very specific about the two things you asked, Federica. First of all, why did a company like BASF come to Uruguay? Uruguay. There's a story that is told by the person who decided that we'd be located in Uruguay, and he always said, well, there's one reason we came to Uruguay and another reason we stayed in Uruguay. They're different. And he would say, when you start looking for places to go to set up services, you look at social, economic, political stability, numbers, quality of life, connectivity, etc. And Uruguay, the regional context in that regard, got good marks. However, when they went to Uruguay, what they found was that just a few hours after setting foot in Uruguay, they found two completely different things, which were what completely justified setting up shop here. One, it's an open door country. It's a country that from the government, through its different institutions, educational institutions, etc., everyone made us feel welcome. And that is really interesting for a company to see, to go to a place, get established there and feel welcomed. And Uruguay 21 had an important role to play there, because I think that they were like our chaperones when the company came to Uruguay. What also surprised us, and it surprised us very much, was the workforce in Uruguay. Beyond availability of people who were very well trained, which I think that for people coming from Europe is a surprise sometimes. The high level of the professionals in Uruguay, how updated and well trained all the young people were, even those who were still in school, working in technology, etc. These were very complete profiles in that sense. But mostly people found that people in Uruguay were eager, so eager to learn, to take risks, to say, okay, where do the possibilities lie? Let's make the most of those. A lot of those soft skills that sometimes we take very lightly, or we think that, well, at the end of the day, if we have people who are technicians more than anything, that's fine. But really, that's what made the company, that's what surprised the company. We found so many people who were wanting to learn, wanting to understand. And the reality there is that it was an initial project, bringing services in one area and finances. Today, we are working on our third large project, 300 people turned into 500 right now. And Uruguay, for a company like BASF, our center in Montevideo, is a place of trust to bring our global services. And that's, for those of us who are Uruguayan working on this project, it makes us very proud. And then you asked me about the other side, saying, well, what tools did we use? Let's see, if you will, we've been quite demanding of everything that the Uruguay 21 team has to offer, and especially the finishing school team. Setting everything up in BASF was quite typical as far as developing, training people, and we found several good things with the finishing schools. Was that if we proposed something, there was a program there. They were never closed. They said, no, this is the proposal, this is the program. Rather, their doors were always open to finding common solutions that would be beneficial to us all. So the flexibility of the team there to find that middle road, that middle ground that would be useful from the beginning was useful. And it still is, because companies like ours, we have many needs when it comes to generating new skills, capacities, working on distributed teams where people have to interact with colleagues all over the world. You might know something and work in one area, but you need to be innovative and develop value propositions in other areas. And that requires, as Viviana said, being really agile, being very fast when it comes to being able to provide support and training people. And really, we've always worked very well with Uruguay 21 as middlemen there, and with the finishing schools, in order to develop the best program possible to meet our needs, which are the needs that go along with the needs of the organization, and what makes it interesting for a company like BASF to have a service center here. And then another channel that was provided to us, and we also feel very much involved in the development from the beginning, which was smart talent. This is a wonderful channel for communication at every level with the workforce in Uruguay. You can position your brand, talk about your events, you can clearly communicate who you are what you need, what opportunities you offer for development. So it's an open dialogue that we have with the entire community of possible collaborators with us, which is extremely useful. So useful, and it offers not only an opening, but also speed, which is an important factor. So for us, almost 6 years into it, we have 3 projects set up in Uruguay. This continues to be a very good decision having come here. We feel that the company trusts and increasingly trusts the team in Montevideo to provide global services. And we've had great partners along the way from Uruguay 21 and the agencies that supported us. Thank you very much, Anna. That was wonderful. So let's go to Bernardo Mancella from Globan. How developing talent and how important this talent development initiative has been, how important it has been to Globan Uruguay. Thank you. Thank you, Federica. The question is very interesting. I'm also very proud to be a part of this panel today. It's so interesting and on such an interesting topic as well. So developing talent, the easy answer is to say that's really important. I have no doubt that it is. Why? Because there's several aspects to this when I answer so easily. First of all, it helps company develop in the digital and cognitive world, and this is a market that is growing by leaps and bounds. There's a demand that's very well known by the sector when it comes to IT. That's what we're talking about, meeting needs, satisfying demand, and more possibilities. And this is a reality not only in Uruguay, but worldwide. But the potential for growth is what keeps us on this path of developing more and more talent. And I think it's good to talk about this and emphasize that when it comes to attracting talent and searching for that talent, we're looking for the skills people bring. If they know the technology or not, if they have specific expertise in technology, in the short term, that might be necessary, but that's what we're looking for. But when we bring someone into our team, we look at the talent and skills they have when it comes to learning. Why? Because we've been in Uruguay for 10 years as of June, which is very important to us. And when I think about the first people we hired, so talented, they had so much experience, and I look at them today and I see their development, how they've transformed. And I tell myself again, what we were looking for was not the technology knowledge, but what they had inside, the desire to learn, to be flexible, to be committed. And I really do agree very much with my colleagues have said. In Uruguay, there is talent that obviously has great communication skills, not only in English, but also Spanish, but English and Portuguese, but they're committed to organizational goals. It's not just a person who punches in and punches out at work. They feel ownership, they feel a part of the organization, and they complement our strategic goals. This focus is very important to me, and it has greater weight now with the pandemic, this market and the potential for growth. It's not that we're being left behind. This means that digital transformation is increasingly necessary and increasingly fast. So what's important to me is attracting that talent and then using Uruguay 21, which really has been an important tool with all of its programs. It's been extremely relevant in the finishing schools, specifically for reskilling and upskilling, which we're hearing about a lot nowadays. But it really is very important to think about how to make our talent relevant. We bring our talent in, but how do we transform them? How do we make them increasingly relevant worldwide? Who they're inspired, they change. Today they think A, tomorrow they're thinking B. And so the evolution of these technologies are really important. It's really important to continue. So when it comes to the programs that we have, where we've worked in Uruguay with Uruguay 21, I'd like to start by talking about the flexibility about the whole team, Jaime, Viviana, and everyone that we've worked with. We've needed, just like Basaf, we've needed everything. We've needed to bring people from the outside. I'm Argentinian. I came here years ago and I felt accepted and embraced by Uruguay when I came here.
We found flexibility. Someone will say, oh, I have an idea for this or for that. We'll think about it. Or I have someone stuck in Cuba. We find a way. And every time I talk to my colleagues from other countries, we realize that it's not so easy to find a connection there between the private and the public sectors. And that connection to the private sector is a really wonderful thing to have. And I'd like to mention two things that we did that were very important, talking about the numbers that Viviana was referring to. We had a very interesting program that we launched last year, and we worked with finishing schools. We trained over 60 young people, and we saw what they knew that was useful for the labor market and what the sector needed. And it was a bridge course, a 3-month course. The first month was more basic, and then there was more practical experience that they gained. We did it with a whole Uruguay 21, Uruguay 21 team and the finishing schools, and many of them were hired by us, and some are still working with us. So that's the idea, to bring people in and prepare them. And we also use this tool to transform talent, people who are already in our organization, and we use this to keep them relevant in terms of methodologies, technologies, or business verticals. So this is also very important in this changing world. And I think it's important to highlight it as well. Also, I wanted to go back to a point that was made about smart talent. Uruguay 21 is also a spokesperson, let's say, for our needs. And what we do together is to debunk myths about the technology sector. A technologist is somebody who comes from a particular engineering background, and the truth is, we feel what you need to have is a passion for technology. That is essential. If you're not interested or you're not passionate about it, you won't be able to do it, and you need to be eager to learn. There are so many tools, even in Uruguay, to get connected, to learn. And the reality is that the world of technology includes more than just programming. There's design, user experience management, development, testing, a lot of different aspects that require a diversity of people with different profiles to connect to those final users and clients. So I think what we should do is continue to put our bets on this country. We continue to want to develop in Uruguay and work more closely with IDB and with Uruguay 21 so that we become stronger and stronger. I think we have a clear role to play in the future in this market. And if you look up, try to find the ceiling, it keeps moving up. So we're very comfortable here in Uruguay. We're here to stay, and we want to continue to develop in this country. Thank you very much, Bernardo. That's excellent. Time is a tyrant, so we're going to have to conclude, and we'll ask Pablo Dutch, Director of INEFOP, to tell us a little bit about how different agencies and institutions work together, an import promotion organization, how it can work with the training organizations, for example. Thank you very much. So great to participate. I'll be brief because I know we don't have a lot of time. I just wanted to comment that for us as an entity that's responsible for employment, for us, this meant an acknowledgement of the close link between these two matters. It may not seem obvious today because it's been working like this for years, but there's a sort of virtuous cycle, attracting investment and promoting employment and talent of skilled workers. That was a step forward, that was progress, that was something very positive that happened in our approach. And this focus on the client and very sophisticated clients that finishing schools have, which is that's the tool we all share. This has allowed us to see from INEFOP the development of certain innovations and best practices, that flexibility that has just been praised by people from the industry. These are elements that are practical and help us imagine how we can translate that into perhaps less sophisticated sectors, simpler sectors, and imagine a logic in which having an operator with a high level of knowledge in the private sector, such as Uruguay 21, and the people who are working with global services directly, this allows us to have a much more flexible and quick operation without having to sacrifice efficiency in the allocation of public resources. So just in closing, we are very happy at INEFOP with our participation and having been a part of this experience from the perspective of the finishing schools. I think it's very good that independent agencies identify common public policy areas so they can work together and learn from each other's experiences. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you, Pablo. I want to thank all the panelists for your participation. Greetings to our audience, in particular for some of the countries who wanted to get to know more about this. Jamaica, Chile, we're getting some virtual greetings from them. Uruguay's doors are always open. And now we give the floor to Michael Larson, who will open up the panel on the experience in Chile. Thank you very much to the Uruguay panel. It was a pleasure listening to your experiences, your history, and the initiative for global services in Uruguay and how it has evolved. We're going now to Chile. We have a very interesting initiative there too. And very interesting also what they've been doing in the public and private partnership arena. We have some panelists representing the public sector. We have Joseph Neme, trade facilitation and trade policy in the Ministry of the Economy in Chile. We also have from the executing agency, the manager of human development, Hernan Araneda from Fundación Chile. And then we also have Natalia Lidihover, general manager of SOFOFA, representing this link between the public sector and the private sector. I just wanted to give you a 30-second introduction so we know the context of what we're talking about when we refer to global services in Chile and the initiative that is ongoing there. And then we'll go straight to the questions. I'm sharing my screen. There's a program that started 2 years ago. We started it jointly with the government of Chile with the leadership of the Undersecretary of the Economy. And it was emulating good practices from Uruguay. And it brought together all the practices we already had for attracting investment and for improving our human resource capabilities, seeking more employment in the sector. And we tried to strengthen the ecosystem that already existed through better coordination among different institutions. You'll see on the slide the agencies that were involved, and even included the Ministry of Science. And based on this initiative, there I've been able to show the next slide. So digital talent was a spin-off from the human capital strengthening area of it. So what do we need by digital talent? First of all, we want to identify the specific needs of the private sector in this area. And when we talk about this with the panelists, we'll see how this is different from what our Uruguay colleagues were telling us about. Secondly, we were looking at implementation. How do you manage the development of these capability suppliers? And then lastly, something that's very important that we're working on is certifications. And these people who are certified, how do we match them up with the needs that the companies have? In 4 years, we wanted to train 15,000 people. So that was the goal, and that's a brief summary of our digital talent initiative. Now we go on directly to the questions. Joseph, if you agree, we can begin with you from the perspective of the public sector. How is this digital talent initiative inserted into the program you coordinate, the global services and support for service export in Chile? Can you tell us a little bit about the challenge of this public-private coordination with so many different players? I haven't seen an initiative in the region, another one that includes so many different actors, so it must be difficult to coordinate all these efforts. So I give the floor to you, Joseph. Good morning. Greetings to everyone, to the audience, to the panelists from Chile and Uruguay. As you were saying, Mikael, and thank you for that introduction because it does give us the context of the initiative and the program we are working on. Chile had a diagnosis as a result of the fourth industrial revolution. Chile needed to move towards a diversification of its economy and its exports. And that's how this service export program was born. We were trying to get Chile to have a greater share in the services where there can be a spin-off, and this is something that's more resilient for our economy, and we wanted to develop some comparative advantages there and differentiate ourselves from others. And what's important here is that this service export program was seen from the perspective that there were unsatisfied needs, human capital. That was one of the pillars that needed to be dealt with specifically and individually. So we felt that since we had an across the board influence, and we already had a service export committee that we led, and they were in tune with the needs in the public and private sectors and in the ecosystem in general, we saw an opportunity to develop that there and to be able to do something specific for digital talent and to develop those skills. But we didn't have additional resources for that necessarily. So a key challenge we had there was to see how we could bring all those actors together to generate internal changes in order to refocus tools that we already had in our training resources, in our production support, or in our production incentives. And this was one of the pillars of the government, was in finding what their role could be here. And we had a social crisis at the end of last year, of course. That was a social crisis. That we've also had the pandemic now. And this accelerated a cultural change that was already happening. So as a ministry, we had the vision that we needed to bring together all the actors, public and private, to push for internal changes in order to refocus certain policies, certain instruments, and we have wonderful partners. So it hasn't been too much of an effort to bring them together to do a good job. Excellent introduction, Joseph. We will now ask Hernan. Hernan coordinates part of a team from the executing agency together with Fundación Chile, has made a tremendous effort to accelerate this process that Chile needs in order to transform itself into a digital country and to have the human capital it needs for this fourth revolution. So tell us about what your role has been. We've already introduced the idea of the complexity of the program, not just because of intrinsic challenges, but because of the need to coordinate so many different public and private actors. So if you can tell us from your perspective, what has this experience been like? And if you have time, you can also tell us about the quality management. I think you've done a great job here. So if you could tell us a little bit about that. Your microphone is muted, Hernan. Thank you. The number of players, the great number, huge number of actors isn't because of masochism. We just felt that they were closer to the world of labor, how technology is evolving. They were closer to the businesses. But then the public sector has certain subsidies that could help us train people, and we needed to make that available to those priorities. And this is not an institutionalized program. It's not something permanent, these subsidies. This is an innovation program that seeks to figure out how to build an ecosystem where there already is a close link between public and private funding of different natures, to allow us to set some mechanisms in motion such that people can find high quality jobs or new businesses can come up in the case of entrepreneurs. So yes, there are a lot of people in this program, and this was just some players that were already there, and this had to be translated into something more concrete, and the foundation saw a possibility here, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we saw what was working in other places. So we were inspired by a very successful initiative in New York City, where there is interaction of all the relevant actors, productive development people, service export people, people who are linked to employment subsidy programs, etc. So this ecosystem is very interesting, but you do need to have a very clear roadmap so you don't get confused. And Talento Digital did something very important in the beginning to know how to focus, have a shared diagnosis, and say that the digital transformation is here, and this is a wave, and we can surf this wave or we can let it drag us. So of course we want to surf it, and talent is essential for this. Developing the talent, Uruguay has mentioned this too. You need to have the talent in order to attract the investment. And we established some benchmarks or KPIs that were essential. If we are able, on a sufficiently large scale, this is 15,000 people in 3 years, this is nothing compared to Chile's labor market, but it is an interesting volume for a pilot test. Then we can scale it up to a much higher percentage of our national workforce. So our main idea here is to test this out, and there are some basic challenges. We haven't wanted to endanger the quality of the courses. There are some high quality courses, and these are compared to some success rates. For example, 70% of the students going on to further education. And the formula here has to do with demand, but also these are bootcamp type courses. It's immersive. It's not a series of courses throughout years. These are months, and the productive employers sector also participates, and it happens very quickly. And there's also a model that we've used to have social emotional skills be developed along with the technical skills. These are essential as well. So what's interesting here is that this is a program that puts a responsible bet on 15,000 people. We are now on our second year, and I'll tell you how we've been doing. But what we're trying to do is fine-tune an ecosystem that can ultimately offer opportunities to hundreds of thousands of people in Chile. Now, you were talking about quality, and there are two important aspects here. The profiles we selected, and we did this with the productive sector. So to start out, we chose entry-level profiles, as we call them now. And these are programs for occupations that do not require prior experience or prior credentials in the field. So it's very intensive for that person, 4 or 5 months in one of these boot camps in order to have access to those jobs and perhaps get started on a career that will allow them to grow professionally along that path. But we're also going to start this year with another program level, more specialized, targeting a different group that will have to reinvent itself, even technical and professional groups who perhaps somebody who was already a technician or an engineer and wants to become a data analyst, for example. Somebody who has a good educational base in mathematics maybe can be a part of this and can change and go to a different phase in their lives. So this is a lab too, but it has consequences for those people who are participating. And regarding quality as well, just to make another point regarding your question, it's been very important to validate the fact that a brief program can be high quality. Not all short programs are low quality, and there is a significant challenge with this in Chile. We are monitoring the quality, and we're generating a set of indicators that can then be escalated up to a system. So also the user experience of the students, we're testing different learning materials. We are taking periodic surveys of the students, taking the pulse of how they feel. We establish a ranking among all the training standards. So we are remaining very close to this experience so that for our next step, we can translate this into a quality system where we can perhaps rank who does it better and have a better target audience. So the challenges are large, but I don't think that coordination has been such a huge issue. As soon, I think, as we decided on a common focus, we've been able to work in a very collaborative manner. That's very interesting, this idea that the scale today allows you to pilot an approach where you are projecting for the future that you will be able to satisfy other needs that are coming up, perhaps something that wasn't even taken into account in the original design. When we participated in the public-private outreach sessions, we talked about sustainability and scalability. So all of this is very interesting. Thank you for your perspective, Hernan. Now, speaking about experiences and lessons learned, I'd like Natalia to tell us, you are sort of a bridge between the public and private sectors as a representative of SOFOFA. So perhaps we've only told the pleasant part of the stories. Maybe you can tell us more about the challenges, because we also need to have experiences that we can learn from. Good morning. It's a pleasure to greet all of you panelists from Uruguay, Chile, and audience. And I thank you for the question. I agree with you. Part of sharing experiences is also sharing what you've learned from mistakes you made. As ICTs, these are very unusual how we do it in Chile. And we are a hinge, as you said, a bridge between public and private sector so that there are true opportunities to train. And the law gives us the ability to be a sort of lab space to help projects mature, and maybe they can then be adopted by the public sector. And we can have the flexibility that the public sector doesn't always have. And that's how we've approached this, because getting people to have the necessary skills to be attractive to industries means that we first had to update ourselves. We've been operating for 40 years, and we're working with a public entity that also has been doing the same thing for 40 years. So we couldn't do it the way we'd been doing it all this time. We were all forced to ask ourselves what new role we needed to take on. There's an initiative with a high level of uncertainty, and it was different than what we had done before. We usually would impart training that was already designed, and when it's being executed, the design is completely known. But this is an initiative that told us that we needed to do everything within our power so that the industry got what it needed and the potential employees had everything they needed to have to satisfy industry's needs. So I think the public sector has the biggest challenge here because simply its structure is based on administrative processes and standards that have the most challenges in terms of creating something new. So it's much more difficult for the public sector than for the private sector to adapt. In the case of companies, it can be easier because we come as a response to a need that's already there. Now, many of these businesses have the challenge of many different needs, so they need to prioritize which ones and how they will target. So we also support companies in that. And if I'm going to convey any kind of lesson that I've learned, you need to have this diversity, you need to have diverse points of view to deal with something so complex. If it had been 100% private or 100% public, we would not have realized all that we needed in order to move forward together with a necessary element in order for the system to be able to develop the necessary talents for a future that doesn't yet exist and that we need to imagine together. And speaking about the future, Natalia, that's not here yet, and that we need to imagine together, we still have a couple minutes left, and we'll ask Joseph to tell us a little bit about your vision for the future and how do you see the sustainability of the program developing? That's a very good question, in particular in terms of the times we're going through with a challenging future and very rapid changes taking place in society. When we had the diagnosis and the digital initiative and we saw the needs, we were looking at a future that's different than the future that's been developing in the last couple of months, of course. But perhaps we were fortunate that the type of initiative that we are working on only comes to be highlighted in terms of how urgent and important it is by these changes, upskilling and skilling, our labor reconversion. There's the challenge of reactivating the economy, and here employment support plans and SME support plans are key, but also the ability people have to reinsert themselves into this labor market. So I think the initiative has a good future. We don't need to explain that there's a need. It's not something that we have to convince people of. And actually, that it's the opposite challenge. We have a scale that allows us to run tests, generate an impact, but in order to really move the needle, as we say informally in Chile, we need a scale that is major, but at the same time, in real time, given the pandemic scenario that we have now and the various challenges, we are testing something real in real time. So I think having a program with you, with the IDB for several years has meant that we've had a certain continuity with our resources, and it doesn't guarantee anything, but it does give us more certainty, and it allows us to continue to offer this support. And this mainstreaming ability that we have, I think really helps us strengthen and project this initiative into the future. Another feature that we think is key in terms of projecting this into the future is our flexibility. And we feel that we have been generating changes as they have become necessary and as we've been learning. And I think we've shown that flexibility. We've brought in actors such as the Ministry of Science that were not included in the original design. And the Digital Talent Initiative was not in the original design, but there was enough flexibility. And when we talked about the need to improve our human capital, we had enough flexibility to be able to include this aspect of it. So I think we have the elements. Perhaps it's more necessary than ever to continue with this program. And it is a big challenge, but I think we've learned quickly and we are well positioned to continue doing what we do. Thank you, Joseph. Hernan, would you like to make some complimentary comments from your perspective on sustainability? And we're talking about sustainability of the program beyond the current administration in power, as Hernan was mentioning. Where do you think the main challenges are for this and how can we face them? I would say there are several challenges, but three are very important. You could say it's a branding challenge or a credibility challenge. Our educational system is very conservative in Chile. So it's very unlikely there are higher education institutions will be in a condition to offer flexible programs, even though we've had this crisis and we hope that this will spur them to some changes because they have had to make some changes whether they've wanted to or not. This, we're showing that you can attend a shorter course of study, a shorter program. You can get a degree that is useful for you in some way in the labor market. But in any case, I think this is a challenge and this cannot be decreed. This is based on results. And that is a main challenge for sustainability. If we can show that a person, people like some we have now who are vulnerable but have some higher education, and they see in the digital world a way to make themselves more employable as 4 or 5 months. I think, and this is on a world scale, these partial credentials where our education paradigms are changing. You don't want to go back to the university for 5 years, but you can do it for a few months. And I think it's very important to show that this works, that this has value. Also, I think we need to diversify our financing methods and sources. A challenge we have today is because of some of the funding we have, this is just aimed towards much more vulnerable parts of our population, but this means certain restrictions from us. And we need to make these services available to people who are also willing and able to pay for them. If this is in line with demand, this will also generate some very interesting returns on investment in the private sector as well. So I think demand for these courses is the second aspect that's very important. And there's a third challenge that was mentioned also by Natalia, and Joseph mentioned it as well. I think it's the challenge of having a quality system that is much more focused on employability results. We don't have that right now. There's a lot of asymmetrical information. People don't know which courses they should go for, a huge variety of courses. But if you had a category of courses where you knew this has the seal of approval of Talento Digital, then you know that if you invest in that, it's worth investing in, and the state will also know that this will help us generate better employability results. So these aspects are important for sustainability. The other issue has to do with more instrumental factors. For example, having a constant monitoring of how demand varies. Also a system that allows us to innovate constantly. A very interesting thing that we saw in New York, that these programs modify their curricula every 6 months. And there's a configuration of actors working together that allows for this to be done. So how can we have a flexible enough system that can help the companies that want to transform to digital or want to be new service providers? How can we help them have a say in this so that this is in line with needs that are coming. So we all need to be in tune with each other. This will be very necessary in order to continue with this initiative of Talento Digital, digital talent. Thank you. We have 1 minute. Natalia, very briefly, do you want to tell us a little bit about labor, the role of labor intermediary? How has it changed in the last few months, and what efforts, special or different efforts, are you making? Well, it's too complex for 1 minute, but I'll try to just complement what has already been said. The phenomenon of labor reconversion has been necessary due to labor changes that we're facing all over the world. It's not just Chile and Uruguay, of course. And there's a response to this in digital talent. It's not the complete response to the problem, of course, but it's part of the answer. We have to look at what occupations are becoming obsolete, and therefore who are the people who will need to be helped to move on to something different, and what direction do we take them? And that's a difficult question. And we have to work with the companies, understand challenges. And when Talento Digital understands what the needs are, we'll see what new occupations are being invented and where to lead people. And we all need, of course, prior skills as well. But this is part of the answer of what we need for reconversion. And this is one of the main important investments of this program, is working with the companies so that we can give true answers to their needs. And I could talk much more about this, but I think given the time we have, that's all I can say. Thank you, Natalia. And just in closing now, I want to thank this panel, the panel from Uruguay, both panels who participated. Both initiatives are similar, but there's a difference in focus that is rather deep, and it means that they complement each other. And from the perspective of the IDB, we always try to look at these experiences so we can learn from each other. And I'll echo what you just said. I think for these programs to be successful, there are two main elements: the active participation of the private sector, even from the beginning stages of design, and then they need to be involved in execution, and there needs to be that labor intermediary role for you, and also flexibility. To the extent that we have flexibility in our programs to adapt to change, we know more than ever today that there's no certainty about what's going to happen tomorrow. So if there's flexibility as part of the design, then we'll be able to adapt more easily. So again, thank you so much to everyone. And I ask our audience to look at the agenda. There's a very interesting session starting right now on AgTech. So thank you for being with us, and we'll see you all soon.